Work and renunciation. What is the highest goal of spiritual experience for man? Self-realization. Can a married man realize the self? Certainly. Married or unmarried, a man can realize the self. Because that is here and now. If it were not so, but attainable by some effort at some time, and if it were new and had to be acquired, it would not be worth pursuit. Because what is not natural is not permanent either. But what I say is that the self is here and now, and alone. A salt dhow diving into the sea will not be protected by a waterproof coat. This world in which we have to toil day in and day out is like the ocean. Yes, the mind is the waterproof coat. So then one may be engaged in work and free from desire, keep up one's solitude, but life's duties allow little time to sit in meditation or even to pray. Yes, work performed with attachment is a shackle, whereas work performed with detachment does not affect the doer. He is, even while working, in solitude. To engage in your duty is the true namaskar, and abiding in God is the only true asana. Should I not renounce my home? If that had been your destiny, the question would not have arisen. Why then did you leave your home in your youth? Nothing happens except by divine dispensation. One's course of conduct in this life is determined by one's prarabdha. Is it good to devote all time to the search for the self? If that is impossible, should I merely keep quiet? If you can keep quiet without engaging in any other pursuit, it is very good. If that cannot be done, where is the use of being quiet so far as realization is concerned? So long as a person is obliged to be active, let him not give up attempts to realize the self. Do not one's actions affect one in afterbirths? Are you born now? Why do you think of other births? The fact is, there is neither birth nor death. Let him who is born think of death and the palliative thereof. Can you show us the dead? Did you know your kinsmen before their birth that you should seek to know them after their death? How does a grihasta fare in the scheme of moksha? Should he not necessarily become a mendicant in order to attain liberation? Why do you think you are a grihasta? Similar thoughts that you are a sannyasin will haunt you, even if you go out as a sannyasin. Whether you continue in the household or renounce it and go to the forest, your mind haunts you. The ego is the source of thought. It creates the body and the world, and it makes you think of being the grihasta. If you renounce, it will only substitute the thought of sannyasa, or of that grihasta, and the environment of the forest for that of the household. But the mental obstacles are always there for you. They even increase greatly in the new surroundings. It is no help to change the environment. The one obstacle is the mind. It must be got over whether in the home or in the forest. If you can do it in the forest, why not in the home? Therefore, why change the environment? Your efforts can be made even now, whatever be the environment. Is it possible to enjoy samadhi while busy in worldly work? The feeling I work is the hindrance. Ask yourself, who works? Remember who you are. Then the work will not bind you. It will go on automatically. Make no effort either to work or to renounce. Your effort is the bondage. What is destined to happen will happen. If you are destined not to work, work cannot be had, even if you hunt for it. If you are destined to work, you will not be able to avoid it. You will be forced to engage yourself in it. So leave it to the higher power. You cannot renounce or retain as you choose. Bhagavan said yesterday that while one is engaged in search of God within, outer work should go on automatically. In the life of Sri Chaitanya, it is said that during his lectures to students he was really seeking Krishna's self within, forgot all about his body, and went on talking of Krishna only. This raises a doubt whether work can safely be left to itself. Should one keep part attention on the physical work? The self is all. Are you apart from the self, or can the work go on without the self? The self is universal. So all actions will go on whether you strain yourself to be engaged in them or not. The work will go on of itself. Thus Krishna told Arjuna that he need not trouble to kill the Kauravas. They were already slain by God. It was not for him to resolve the work and worry himself about it, but to allow his own nature to carry out the will of the higher power. But the work may suffer if I do not attend to it. Attending to the self means attending to the work. Because you identify yourself with the body, you think that work is done by you. But the body and its activities, including that work, are not apart from that self. What does it matter whether you attend to the work or not? Suppose you walk from one place to another. You do not attend to the steps you take, yet you find yourself, after a time, at your goal. You see how the business of walking goes on without your attending to it. So also with other kinds of work. Is it then like sleepwalking? Like somnambulism? Quite so. When a child is fast asleep, his mother feeds him. The child eats the food just as well when he is fully awake. But the next morning he says to the mother, "Mother, I did not take food last night." The mother and others know that he did, but he says that he did not. He was not aware. Still, the action had gone on. A traveler in a cart has fallen asleep. The bulls move, stand still, or are unyoked during the journey. He does not know these events, but finds himself in a different place after he wakes up. He has been blissfully ignorant of the occurrences on the way, but the journey has been finished. Similarly with the self of a person. The ever-wakeful self is compared to the traveler asleep in the cart. The waking state is the moving of the bulls. Samadhi is their standing still. Because samadhi means jagarat sushupti, that is to say, the person is aware but not concerned in the action. The bulls are yoked but do not move. Sleep is the unyoking of the bulls. For there is complete stopping of activity corresponding to the relief of the bulls from the yoke. Or again, like the instance of the cinema. Scenes are projected on the screen in the cinema show, but the moving pictures do not affect or alter the screen. The spectator pays attention to them, not to the screen. They cannot exist apart from the screen, yet the screen is ignored. So also the self is the screen where the pictures, activities, etc. are seen going on. The man is aware of the latter, but not aware of the essential former. All the same, the world of pictures is not apart from the self, whether he is aware of the screen or unaware. The actions will continue. But there is an operator in the cinema. The cinema show is made out of insentient materials. The lamp, the pictures, the screen, etc. All are insentient, and so they need an operator, the sentient agent. On the other hand, the self is absolute consciousness, and therefore self-contained. There cannot be an operator apart from the self. I'm not confusing the body with the operator. Rather, I am referring to Krishna's words in the 61st verse, chapter 18 of the Gita. The Lord, O Arjuna, dwells in the very heart of being, and he, by his delusive power, spins round all beings set as if on a machine. The functions of the body involving the need for an operator are born in mind. Since the body is jada or insentient, a sentient operator is necessary. Because people think that they are jivas, Krishna said that God resides in the heart as the operator of the jivas. In fact, there are no jivas and no operator, as it were, outside them. The self comprises all. It is the screen, the pictures, the seer, the actors, the operator, the light, the theater, and all else. You're confounding the self with the body and imagining yourself the actor is like the seer representing himself as an actor in the cinema show. Imagine the actor asking if he can enact a scene without the screen. Such is the case of the man who thinks of his actions apart from the self. On the other hand, it is like asking the spectator to act in the cinema picture, so we must learn sleepwalking. Actions and states are according to one's point of view. A crow, an elephant, a snake, each makes use of one limb for two alternate purposes. With one eye, the crow looks on either side. For the elephant, the trunk serves the purpose of both a hand and a nose, and the serpent sees as well as hears with his eyes. Whether you say the crow has an eye or eyes, or refer to the trunk of the elephant as hand or nose, or call the eyes of the serpent its ears, it means all the same. Similarly, in the case of the jnani, sleepwalking or waking sleep or dream sleep or dreaming wakefulness are all much the same thing. But we have to deal with a physical body in a physical waking world. If we sleep while work is going on or try to work while asleep, the work will go wrong. Sleep is not ignorance, it is one's pure state. Wakefulness is not knowledge, it is ignorance. There is full awareness in sleep and total ignorance in waking. Your real nature covers both and extends beyond. The self is beyond both knowledge and ignorance. Sleep, dream, and waking states are only modes passing before the self. They proceed whether you are aware of them or not. That is the state of the jnani, in whom pass the states of samadhi, waking dream, and deep sleep, like the bulls moving, standing, or being unyoked while the passenger is asleep. These answers are from the point of view of the ajnani. Otherwise, such questions would not arise. Of course, they cannot arise for the self. Who would be there to ask? But unfortunately, I have not yet realized the self. That is just the obstacle in your way. You must get rid of the idea that you are an ajnani and have yet to realize the self. You are the self. Was there ever a time when you were not aware of that self? So we must experiment in sleepwalking or in daydreaming? I maintain that the physical body of the man immersed in samadhi as a result of the unbroken contemplation of the self may become motionless for that reason. It may be active or inactive. The mind established in such contemplation will not be affected by the movements of the body or the senses, nor is disturbance of the mind the forerunner of physical activity, whereas another person asserts that physical activity certainly prevents samadhi or unbroken contemplation. What is Bhagavan's opinion? You are the abiding proof of my statement. Both of you are right. You refer to sahaja nirvikalpa samadhi, and the other refers to Kevalya Nirvikalpa Samadhi. In the latter case, the mind lies immersed in the light of the self, whereas the mind lies in the darkness of ignorance and deep sleep. And the subject makes a distinction between samadhi and activity after waking up from samadhi. Moreover, activity of the body, of the sight, of the vital forces, and of the mind and the cognizance of objects, all these are obstructions for one who seeks to realize Kevalya Nirvikalpa Samadhi. In Sahaja Samadhi, however, the mind has resolved itself into the self and has been lost. The differences and obstructions mentioned above do not therefore exist here. The activities of such a being are like the feeding of a somnolent boy, perceptible to the onlooker but not to the subject. The traveler sleeping in the moving cart is not aware of the motion of the cart because his mind is sunk in darkness, whereas the Sahaja, Jnani, remains unaware of his bodily activities because his mind is dead, having been resolved into the ecstasy of Chidananda, bliss of the self. The mind of the sage who has realized the self is wholly destroyed. It is dead, but to the onlooker he may seem to possess a mind just like the layman. Hence the I in the sage has merely an apparent objective reality. In fact, however, it has neither a subjective existence nor an objective reality. Silence and solitude. Is a vow of silence useful? The inner silence is self-surrender, and that is living without the sense of ego. Is solitude necessary for a sannyasin? Solitude is in the mind of a man. One might be in the thick of the world and yet maintain perfect serenity of mind. Such a person is always in solitude. Another may stay in the forest, but still be unable to control his mind. He cannot be said to be in solitude. Solitude is an attitude of the mind. A man attached to the things of life cannot get solitude wherever he may be. A detached man is always in solitude. What is mauna? That state which transcends speech and thought is mauna. It is meditation without mental activity. Subjugation of the mind is meditation. Deep meditation is eternal speech. Silence is ever speaking. It is the perennial flow of language. It is interrupted by speaking, for words obstruct this mute language. Lectures may entertain individuals for hours without improving them. Silence, on the other hand, is permanent and benefits the whole of humanity. By silence, eloquence is meant. Oral lectures are not so eloquent as silence. Silence is unceasing eloquence. It is the best language. There is a state when words cease and silence prevails. How then can we communicate our thoughts to one another? That becomes necessary if the sense of duality exists. Why does not Bhagavan go about and preach the truth to the people at large? How do you know I am not doing it? Does preaching consist in mounting a platform and haranguing the people around? Preaching is simply communication of knowledge. It can really be done in silence only. What do you think of the man who listens to a sermon for an hour and goes away without having been impressed by it so as to change his life? Compare him with another who sits in a holy presence and goes away after some time with his outlook on life totally changed. Which is the better, to preach loudly without effect, or to sit silently, sending out inner force? Again, how does speech arise? There is abstract knowledge. whence arises the ego, which in turn gives rise to thought, and thought to the spoken word. So the word is the great-grandson of the original source. If the word can produce effect, judge for yourself. How much more powerful must be the preaching through silence. But people do not understand this simple, bare truth, the truth of their everyday, ever-present, eternal experience. This truth is that of the self. Is there anyone unaware of the self? But they do not like even to hear of this truth, whereas they are eager to know what lies beyond about heaven, hell, and reincarnation. Because they love mystery and not the truth, religions cater to them so as eventually to bring them round to the self. Whatever be the means adopted, you must at last return to the self. So why not abide in the self here and now? To be a spectator of or to speculate about the other world, the self is necessary. Therefore they are not different from the self. Even the ignorant man, when he sees the objects, sees only the self. Mind control. How can I control the mind? There is no mind to control if the self is realized. The self shines forth when the mind vanishes. In the realized man, the mind may be active or inactive. The self alone exists. For the mind, body, and world are not separate from the self, and they cannot remain apart from the self. Can they be other than the self? When aware of the self, why should one worry about these shadows? How do they affect the self? If the mind is merely a shadow, how then is one to know the self? The self is the heart, self-luminous. Illumination arises from the heart and reaches the brain, which is the seat of the mind. The world is seen with the mind. So you see the world by the reflected light of the self. The world is perceived by an act of the mind. When the mind is illumined, it is aware of the world. When it is not illumined, it is not aware of the world. If the mind is turned in towards the source of illumination, objective knowledge ceases, and the self alone shines as the heart. The moon shines by reflecting the light of the sun. When the sun has set, the moon is useful for displaying objects. When the sun has risen, no one needs the moon, though its disk is visible in the sky. So it is with the mind and the heart. The mind is made useful by its reflected light. It is used for seeing objects. When turned inwards, it merges into the source of illumination, which shines by itself, and the mind is then like the moon in the daytime. When it is dark, a lamp is necessary to give light. But when the sun has arisen, there is no need for the lamp. The objects are visible. And to see the sun, no lamp is necessary. It is enough if you turn your eyes towards the self-luminous sun. Similarly with the mind. To see the objects, the light reflected from the mind is necessary. To see the heart, it is enough that the mind is turned towards it. Then the mind does not count and the heart is self-effulgent. After leaving this ashram in October, I was aware of the presence that prevails in Sri Bhagavan's presence enfolding me for about 10 days. All the time, while busy in my work, there was an undercurrent of that peace and unity. It was almost like the dual consciousness which one experiences while half asleep in a dull lecture. Then it faded out entirely, and the old stupidities came in instead. Work leaves no time for separate meditation. Is it enough constantly reminding oneself I am while at work? If you strengthen the mind, that peace will continue for all time. Its duration is proportional to the strength of mind acquired by repeated practice. And such a mind is able to hold on to the current. In that case, engagement or no engagement in work, the current remains unaffected and uninterrupted. It is not the work that hinders, but the idea that it is you who are doing it. Is a set meditation necessary for strengthening the mind? Not if you keep the idea always before you that it is not your work. At first, effort is needed to remind yourself of it, but later on it becomes natural and continuous. The work will go on of its own accord, and your peace will remain undisturbed. Meditation is your true nature. You call it meditation now, but there are other thoughts distracting you. When these thoughts are dispelled, you remain alone. That is, in the state of meditation, free from thoughts. And that is your real nature, which you are now trying to gain by keeping away other thoughts. Such keeping away of other thoughts is now called meditation. But when the practice becomes firm, the real nature shows itself as true meditation. Other thoughts arise more forcibly when one attempts meditation. Yes, all kinds of thought arise in meditation. That is only right, for what lies hidden in you is brought out. Unless it rises up, how can it be destroyed? Thoughts rise up spontaneously, as it were, but only to be extinguished in due course, thus strengthening the mind. There are times when persons and things take a vague, almost transparent form, as in a dream. One ceases to observe them as outside, but is passively conscious of their existence, while not actively conscious of any kind of selfhood. There's a deep quietness in the mind. Is it at such times that one is ready to dive into the self? Or is this condition unhealthy, the result of self-hypnotism? Should it be encouraged as yielding temporary peace? There is consciousness along with quietness in the mind. This is exactly the state to be aimed at. The fact that the question has been framed on this point without realizing that it is the self shows that the state is not steady, but casual. The word diving is appropriate when there are outgoing tendencies, and when therefore the mind has to be directed and turned within, there is a dip below the surface of externalities. But when quietness prevails, without obstructing the consciousness, where's the need to dive? If that state has not been realized by the self, the effort to do so may be called diving. In this sense, the state may be said to be suitable for realization or diving. Thus, the last two questions you are put do not arise. The mind continues to feel partial towards children, possibly because the form of a child is often used to personify the ideal. How can this preference be outgrown? Hold on to the self. Why think of children and of your reactions towards them? This third visit to Tiruvannamalai seems to have intensified the sense of egoism in me and made meditation less easy. Is this an unimportant passing phase or a sign that I should avoid such places hereafter? It is imaginary. This place or another is within you. Such imaginations must end, for places as such have nothing to do with the activities of the mind. Also, your surroundings are not merely a matter of your individual choice. They are there as a matter of course, and you should rise above them and not get yourself entangled in them. A boy of 8.5 years sat in the hall at about 5 in the evening when Sri Bhagavan went up to the hill. During his absence, the boy spoke on yoga and Vedanta in pure, simple, and literary Tamil, quoting freely from the saying of saints and the sacred scriptures. When Sri Bhagavan entered the hall after nearly 3/4 of an hour, only silence prevailed. For the 20 minutes the boy sat in Sri Bhagavan's presence. He spoke not a word but was merely gazing at him. Then tears flowed from his eyes. He wiped them with his left hand and soon after left the place, saying that he still awaits self-realization. How should we explain the extraordinary characteristics of the boy? The characteristics of his last birth are strong in him, but however strong they may be, they do not manifest themselves save in a calm, still mind. It is within the experience of all that attempts to revive memory sometimes fail, while something flashes into the mind when it is calm and quiet. How can the rebellious mind be made calm and tranquil? Either see its source so that it may disappear, or surrender yourself so that it may be struck down. Self-surrender is the same as self-knowledge, and either of them necessarily implies self-control. The ego submits only when it recognizes the higher power. How can I escape from samsara, which seems to be the real cause for making the mind restless? Is not renunciation an effective means to realize tranquility of mind? Samsara is only in your mind. The world does not speak out saying, "Here I am, the world." If it did so, it would be ever there, making its presence felt by you even in your sleep. Since, however, it is not there in sleep, it is impermanent. Being impermanent, it lacks substance. Having no reality apart from the self, it is easily subdued by the self. The self alone is permanent. Renunciation is the non-identification of the self with the not-self. When the ignorance which identifies the self with not-self is removed, not-self ceases to exist, and that is true renunciation. Can we not perform actions without attachment even in the absence of such renunciation? An Atmajnani alone can be a good karma yogi. Does Bhagavan condemn Veda philosophy? The Veda can subsist only when you identify the self with the not-self. Advaita is non-identification. Bhakti and Jnana. Sri Bhagavata outlines a way to find Krishna in the heart by prostrating to all and looking on all as the Lord himself. Is this the right path leading to self-realization? Is it not easier thus to adore Bhagavan in whatever meets the mind than to seek the supramental through the mental inquiry, "Who am I?" Yes, when you see God in all, do you think of God or do you not? You must certainly think of God for seeing God all round you. Keeping God in your mind becomes dhyana, and dhyana is the stage before realization. Realization can only be in and of the self. It can never be apart from the self. Dhyana must precede it. Whether you make dhyana on God or on the self, it is immaterial, for the goal is the same. You cannot by any means escape the self. You want to see God in all, but not in yourself? If all is God, are you not included in that all? Being God yourself, is it a wonder that all is God? This is the method advised in Sri Bhagavata and elsewhere by others. But even for this practice, there must be the seer or thinker. Who is he? How to see God, who is all-pervasive? To see God is to be God. There is no all apart from God for him to pervade. He alone is. Should we read Gita now and then? Always. What is the relation between jnana and bhakti? The eternal, unbroken, natural state of abiding in the self is jnana. To abide in the self, you must love the self. Since God is verily the self, love of the self is love of God, and that is bhakti. Jnana and bhakti are thus one and the same. While doing nama japa for an hour or more, I fall into a state like sleep. On waking up, I recollect that my japa has been interrupted, so I try again. Like sleep, that is right. It is the natural state. Because you are now associated with the ego, you consider that natural state is something which interrupts your work. So you must have the experience repeated until you realize that it is your natural state. You will then find that japa is extraneous, but still it will go on automatically. Your present doubt is due to that false identity, namely, of identifying yourself with the mind that does the japa. Japa means clinging to one thought to the exclusion of all other thoughts. That is its purpose. It leads to dhyana, which ends in self-realization, or jnana. How should I carry on nama japa? One should not use the name of God mechanically and superficially, without the feeling of devotion. To use the name of God, one must call upon him with yearning and unreservedly surrender oneself to him. Only after such surrender is the name of God constantly with the man. Where is then the need for inquiry or vichara? Surrender can take effect only when it is done with full knowledge as to what real surrender means. Such knowledge comes after inquiry and reflection and ends invariably in self-surrender. There is no difference between jnana and absolute surrender to the Lord, that is, in thought, word, and deed. To be complete, surrender must be unquestioning. The devotee cannot bargain with the Lord or demand favors at his hands. Such entire surrender comprises all. It is jnana and vairagya, devotion and love